Hello everyone, welcome, and also welcome to the cyberspace audience to another episode of Wednesday Night Live. The topic being, do you know how to empathize? Empathy. One of my favorite topics. So, as you all know, the Jewish calendar is a very sophisticated and elegant, as well as complex structure, which reflects the elegance and complexity of life itself. And that's why existence is made up of time and space. So, for Jews, the understanding both of the parameters of space and the parameters of time were always a type of mirror image, like a benchmark that helped them align themselves to the rhythms of life. And being that life is ever changing and constantly changing, so to try to impose a static attitude to life is really our undoing. You know, we all like, sometimes we call stability. But stability, like someone told me, I'd love to be able to not have ups and downs in my life. But you know, when you look at a cardiogram and you have a flat line, it's not a good sign. You want a cardiogram to look like a wave. Ups and downs all the time. Yeah, you don't want the dips to be too low and the heights to be too high, but you want a constant flow like this. And a straight line in life is considered to be death, actually. So life is synonymous with change, and it's the people who know how to navigate change are the ones that know how to master the vicissitudes and the different shifts that we all will go through in life. So when you look at the sun, for example, you can get the impression that there's a certain stability. You don't see a difference between one day to the next when you look at the sun. Yeah, I mean, there may be an overcast day. Obviously, the sun has sun flares and sunspots, and there are shifts, but they're not very obvious. You look at the moon, on the other hand, always changing. There's no night that the moon is in the same shape as it was the night before. Now, although it's true that the moon is always a full moon, depending where you are in outer space, but from the perspective of Earth, because the moon is always reflecting the sun, fully reflecting it, but from the perspective of Earth, there's the shifts, there's the constant phases of the moon. There's the first quarter, the full moon, the third quarter, the new moon. And as such, Jews count according to the moon. We not only count according to the moon, we also are compared to the moon. Emphasizing the point that I just made, that we align ourselves with the rhythms of the moon's changes. So the sun symbolizes, on a cosmic level and a spiritual level, consistency, and the moon symbolizes the real stuff of life, which is change. Obviously, you want to have both. But every element of growth is going through change. A tree, you want to have a tree have deep roots, a solid foundation, but you want it to also grow. You want it to not just remain static and stable the whole time. And the same thing is with our lives. A great swimmer is not somebody who knows how to swim under all circumstances. A great swimmer knows how to go with the flow. If you're swimming in an ocean or a sea, in unknown waters, and suddenly a storm strikes, the difference between a great swimmer and a not a great swimmer is the great swimmer will know when to stop fighting the tide, will know when to just allow it to be carried by the waves, and then when the storm ceases and it's calm again, that's when you use that moment to forward thrust. And just learning how to not fight the changes that we face, but rather ride with them, is the secret to life. Now, it sounds so easy. Why then is it not easy for us? Why is it when some of us face challenges and difficulties, loss, trauma, some can't cope. They get devastated. And others can't swim these waters. That's part of the discussion here this evening. But it brings me back to the understanding of the period in time in which we are right now, which was just an introduction to what the nature of time is. So, though Einstein, in modern science, in modern times, was the first to really see time as a true element of energy, as I mentioned last week at length, this is a known fact for thousands of years in Jewish literature. All the way back to the Bible itself, the Zohar interprets. When you read in the Bible, it says that the world was created in 6 days. The phrase actually is Sheishes Yomim Osa Hashem Elokim Es Hashemayim V'Saaretz. 6 days God created heaven and earth. And as I pointed out last week, it should have said in 6 days, during 6 days, in the span of 6 days. What is it? It's like missing a word. You can't write a sentence, 6 days God created heaven and earth. And the Zohar says, yes, that's exactly the way it should be read, because the days themselves were created. The structure of time and its spectrum of 6 days, and then the 7th day, Shabbos, is the cycle of time, because time is energy. Kol yom v'yom oved vidite. Every day has its unique energy, and one energy is different than the other. And just like space, every space has its particular role, every time has its role. So and time is energy, and it's seen not as a linear flow of time, past, present, and future, like one long line, but rather, like I said before, a cycle. Not a straight line, but a cycle, or better put, a spiral. So when we come back to the day of our birthday, or any other commemoration that we celebrate, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, a holiday, our own personal birthdays, is because that moment the cycle is returning to its original axis, original point, on a different axis, or a different plane, but at the original point, and therefore we can tap into the same energies. So here's just a brief summary of Jewish time, which is really, as I said, the rhythm of life. So we all know that in a way the story of the Jewish people begins with Abraham, but more specifically begins with their exodus from Egypt. So the first of all holidays is Passover. Passover is when the Jews, after 210 years of oppression, were finally liberated. So it begins with redemption. It comes 49 days they count, and on the 50th day they receive the mandate, the divine mandate of how the blueprint, how to live our lives. That's 50 days after the redemption. Then comes another 40 days. Moses goes up on the mountain and stays there for 40 days and 40 nights, returns on the 17th of Tammuz, only to find that the people have built a golden calf. And he breaks the tablets. And that begins the period that we call today the 3 weeks. And then Moses marches right back up the mountain to beg for forgiveness for the people. So here you go, redemption, the mandate, now betrayal. And Moses is up on the mountain for another 40 days. After the 40 days that he received this mandate, the Torah, 40 days, right now we're in the period where he's up on the mountain the second time. And he prays, but it's not successful. And he comes back down on Rosh Chodesh Elul. It's 40 days from the 17th of Tammuz, Rosh Chodesh Elul, which will be in a few more weeks. 40 days exactly from the 17th of Tammuz. Last Shabbos was Tisha B'Av, so 3 weeks have passed. Now it's almost 4 weeks. So it'll be another few weeks. And then he comes down, and then he goes up a third time for 40 days. So now we have 50 days from Passover to Shavuos, 40 days of receiving the Torah, 40 days of asking for forgiveness, and now a third set of 40 days. And this one will conclude on when? On Yom Kippur. So Moses will be up on the mountain the whole month of Elul, the Hebrew month of Elul, which follows this month of Av, including Rosh Hashanah, and will come down on Yom Kippur, where he prevails over God, Salachti Kidvarecha, as we will say the evening of the Kol Nidrei Yom Kippur, that I will forgive them as you've requested. And finally, so we have redemption, the blueprint, the mandate, betrayal, reconciliation, and finally, success. So you have the story of life right over there, right over here. So basically, Yom Kippur is exactly 170 days from Passover. Because from Passover to Shavuos is 50, and then 3 sets of 40. If my math serves me right, is 120, plus 50 equals 170. Did I get it right? So 170 days. And this isn't just random, it's actually it's a process, the story of life. You have a breakthrough, you find some redemption in your life, you begin to build your life, and then there's always the challenges. There's some form of betrayal. The real question is, can you find reconciliation? Can you heal after something was broken? The reason I wrote the book 60 Days, some of you may be familiar, which begins from the first day of Elul and goes through the month of Elul and Tishrei, is to show that how this period in time is a actual personal process, a personal workbook, a guide for our own growth, because we all have in a microcosm the same story. So the cycle is the story of our lives. So aligning ourselves with this calendar, not only knowing what happens in these dates, but also reliving, recreating. Hayom Me'elin Niskarim V'Nasim, as I mentioned, that we actually recreate the energy of the time, helps us align ourselves and find the same type of resolution in our own lives. So life, in a way, you could say, is like, just like what I said, the cycle of the heartbeat or the breath, exhale and inhale, is like tension and resolution. So where are we now? We're now in the period that is called the beginning of the 7 weeks of comfort, Shabbat Nachamu, 7 weeks of consolation. That after the 3 weeks of Puranasa, that's the expression of the Talmud, meaning 3 weeks of infliction, 3 weeks that were the saddest weeks of the calendar, that symbolized that moment from when they besieged, surrounded the wall around Jerusalem, both in the first temple and the second temple. And then finally 3 weeks later destroyed the temple, both the first and the second, the first by the Babylonians, the second by the Romans. So now begins, after 3 weeks of darkness, begins the light. And it's called Shabbat Nachamu. The 7 weeks of Nacham in Hebrew is consolation, comfort, many different meanings to it. And it's also part of this process. Because now that there's been a break, both the breaking of the tablets, the breaking of the wall, the breaking of the temple, the breaking in our own personal lives, however we apply it, we've all have our breaks. Then there comes the repair and the healing. And it's 7 weeks of healing. The 7 weeks will conclude the Shabbos before Rosh Hashanah. So, there's more about this in the book 60 Days. I've written a lot about this. You can find more information online. I just wanted to give an overview. So where we are, to zero in to where we are right now, zooming in, is we are the first week, it's called Shabbat Nachamu. So after last week was Tisha B'Av Shabbos. The fast was on Sunday. So the first Shabbos afterwards is the first Shabbos of Nechama, of comfort. But comfort is not just a nice little word. It has far more deeper meaning. The prophet basically begins, Nachamu Nachamu Ami. God tells the prophet, go Nachamu Nachamu Ami. Console and console my nation, my people. Dabra Alev Yerushalayim. Speak to the heart of Jerusalem. V'kara eleh, and call out to her. Interestingly, just like Eicha began, Eicha is the book of Lamentations that we said Tisha B'Aviv, Saturday night, which talks. How does it begin? Eicha means woe. Eicha Yoshva Badad. Woe to Jerusalem that she sits alone. It also begins with Jerusalem. So here too, the consolation also begins with Jerusalem, which can seem a little odd, as I discussed as well. You're talking about people who've undergone the Holocaust, suffered greatly. A temple was destroyed. Many lives were lost. A great dark exile began. Of all the things the prophet begins with, he talks about the other things as well, but he begins with the loneliness of Jerusalem. And the consolation also comes, speak to the heart of Jerusalem. Console her. So it does begin, console the people, but right away it speaks about Jerusalem. So as I explained last week, was the greatest challenge. When we have challenges, not always the difficulty itself, it's the ensuing loneliness that we feel we're all alone in the challenge. If we knew that we had someone with us, a partner, or team, or people that are with us, it would make far more difference in how to endure anything. The loneliness, the feel you're all alone and isolated, and no one cares, and no one can understand, and no one really wants to be involved in your pain, that is far more debilitating than the pain itself. You see, for example, a person, God forbid, in a hospital has no visitors and no guests, no goodwill greetings, get well greetings, and so on. That breaks and demoralizes the spirit, and it doesn't help the healing process. On the other hand, you see someone who has visitors and guests and people who love that person, and they are there for them, simply on a physical level, that builds the immune system. You feel a strength, you feel a will to live, a will to fight, and your friends help you with that. So when Yirmiyahu, the prophet, saw the loneliness, to him that was the most devastating part of it. Now it's one thing we suffered greatly, but now that we're alone, we feel we're alone. That means you don't even have the strength to rebuild because you think it's all lost. It's resignation. So when the consolation comes, a week later, we also don't just speak to the people, we also speak to the loneliness of Jerusalem. And Jerusalem, of course, is more than just a city. It itself, seeing Jerusalem, the different names that we have for it, it itself represents cosmically and personally, in a microcosm, every life on earth. So when Jerusalem is complete, we're complete. There's an expression, Yerushalayim Shalmaila, Yerushalayim Shalmata. There's a Jerusalem above and a Jerusalem below. And there's a Jerusalem in every person's heart. Actually, the word Jerusalem in Hebrew, Yerushalayim, is made up of two words. Yerushalayim. Yerushalayim means complete awe. It means it's a state of complete awe, complete transcendence, a sense of something far greater than we are. As Jacob said when he fell asleep on this mount, Temple Mount, he said, "This is Zeshar Shamayim. This is the gate to heaven." So now, to go to the topic of Nechama, of consolation, let me share with you a story. Years ago, many moons ago, we host every year, every summer, a annual summer retreat, a real full-fledged camping retreat, with no recourse, no buildings to be found within walking distance. So we chose these different camping sites, and we went there, and we had a few hundred people. We had this outdoor, in a central tent, and we were exposed to the elements, for good or for bad. We did this over 10 years. People still talk about it. It was pretty amazing events. That's why we did it, even though it was a little roughing it. And especially for people living in the modern age, you'd wonder why, when the Jews had to go in the wilderness, they really had no choice. But why would the normal people in the 20th and 21st century, because we did begin doing it in the 20th century, which was a century ago, and why would normal people not go to 5-star hotels or 4-star hotels or whatever star hotel and choose to go to this type of environment? But when you experience it, there's something magical about being without the crutches and the different of man-made structures. So we did this every year, and it was a whole operation. It was a whole event that required a lot of planning and so on. We had a very good staff, thank God. There were a lot of people that would come, and we had to make sure everybody's comfortable. Not everybody even knew what camping was. So there was one summer, I recall, and God, the first few years, God was nice and it didn't rain, but then the torrential rains began, and so it made things even more uncomfortable sometimes. But they also created a lot deeper bonding. But without going into elaboration, all this was a preface to a story that happened that I remember very vividly. I think this was in Lebanon. It was called Lebanon State Park at the time, somewhere in New Jersey. We found a great camping site, and the staff was welcoming everybody. And we had in case somebody particularly is a grouchy mood or is uncomfortable, so we had a whole procedure how to make sure that people are happy, and because there was nowhere to really go, and it's not like you could just drive away or something like that. And in situations you had to be pretty versatile and resilient to deal with different challenges. Obviously, we have people who are professionals and know how to camp and know how to pitch a tent. And trust me, I had no clue what this was at some point. But then when I finally figured it out, it was pretty cool. If you know how to pitch a tent, it protects you almost from anything, except obviously a rhinoceros or a hippopotamus, which we didn't encounter. We encountered almost everything except that. And there was one weekend particular. So we had a staff that was a hierarchy. That if someone particularly was being difficult or finding it difficult, so we had people who talked to them. But there was one woman who was extremely, I would say, very fragile and very angry. And as much as the staff tried to console her, and it was Shabbat Nachamu, just for the record, it's relevant to the story, she would not. She was just, everything was no good. Her tent is no good, the food is no good, that's no good, no good. Clearly there was more that was bothering her than the camping. So finally, since no one else was able to handle it, it ended up in my lap. So I went to speak to her right before the meal, Friday night, and I said, "What can we do to help you here? Anything you like." but I saw there was really no one to talk to, and obviously tell her that she's that she's irritable and nervous, and so on doesn't help when a person is in that situation. So obviously I held my tongue, but I clearly saw that wasn't our problem; it was her problem. Okay, so be it. Listen, you got to let some people just work it through and get the steam out. There was really nothing that no one had done anything to her. It was just she was just not in a pleasant place for whatever reason. I tried to speak to her. That was that. I said, if you want to join us, join us. If not, feel free. You can come. There'll be food all the time. I tried to do the best I could. The next day came, Shabbos morning, and the same thing. She's coming. She came to the davening. We davened in a big central tent. I could see the sour face, and the bitching around about everything. And then came the reading of the Torah, and then the Haftarah, and we said Nachamu, this Haftarah. And I shared a few words after the reading of the Torah about Nachamu, and I asked a question, which is what led to this story, which is why I want to share it here. The Medrash has an interesting narrative, a dialogue actually, between God and the Jewish people. After the destruction of the temple, as I said, now came the time of comforting, of consoling. Similar to what we do, God forbid, when someone dies, we go to a Shiva call. You go to be Menachem Ovel. That's the word, Menachem, the same word, Nachamu. Menachem Ovel means to console the orphans, to console those that experience the loss. The word Menachem, and that's Menachem Ov as well. Menachem Ov means the consolation of this month of Ov when the bad, sad things have happened. Okay, so the Medrash has an interesting dialogue that works its way through the 7 weeks of the consolation. That when God sends the prophet, Nachamu Ami, go console my nation, and speak to the heart of Jerusalem, then comes the next week, the Haftarah says, and this is from Avidraham from a Medrash, this is commentaries that explain, the next week, the next Haftarah after this one, the Jews say, why did you forsake us, God? And the Medrash explains, why are you sending a prophet to console us? You destroyed our lives and the temple, so why don't you come and speak to us? It would be like someone hurt you, instead of coming and apologizing, they send somebody else. Why are you sending us prophets? And then the third week, God responds, yes, you're right. And then finally comes the next week and he says, Anochi hu menachemchem, I, meaning God's essence, Anochi, a double Anochi, just like a double Nachamu, I myself will come and Menachem and console you. And the dialogue then continues until the 7th week. They said the Shabbos before Rosh Hashanah. I'm not going to go through the details. In 60 days I have broken down the whole Medrash. It's a very fascinating dialogue back and forth. Many lessons can be derived from it. But the point I made here in this talk that I was giving in this camping retreat, and the woman was there, was I said, the question is, what's going on here? It's a good argument. If God destroyed, why doesn't He come and console them? Why is He sending messengers? And you see at the end of it, the Jews were right. God says, yes, you're right, I will come and console you myself. So why didn't He come in the first place? Why do you have to go through the weeks where first He sends somebody and then they have to ask for it? He should have come on His own. And the answer I offered there was, and I share this as well here, is because that God has the power to console us is no big achievement. God created it all, and God has the power. God has power, is immortal. What God gave us was a greater power than just Him consoling us. He gave human beings the ability to comfort each other. We have the power to comfort each other. And that's the blessing, the gift that God wanted to give them. Not just that I can console you, but also you can console each other. Because that's a bigger question. Since we're all mortals, and we all have our weaknesses, how could one mortal console another mortal? We're all in the same boat, got the same problems. And yet we see the power of empathy and the power of comfort and the power of compassion, that a human being can console another. And we are impacted by it. It helps. That means that each of us has a divine power, because as I said, logically, you don't want a consolation from something that's just as weak as you. How could someone who just has the same problems as you, maybe not today, another day, someone that is just as mortal as you, really give you comfort? The answer is because God endowed the power of comfort, that we have the power to care for each other, and with the power to love each other, and we have the ability to transcend our mortality and actually introduce something immortal in our lives, which is comfort. That's why God didn't come initially. He sent the people. And we see, it would be great if God speaks to us all and comforts us, but there's a power that we have for each other, and we want to be able to know that in a world like ours, we don't just rely on miracles and things that are transcendent and beyond nature, but we can actually help each other. And then I concluded by saying, and therefore, you never know when you're with people. Everybody has their challenges. Some people share them, some don't. Most people suffer very silently. The power you have to say a kind word to somebody, a compassionate word, can go a very long way. Sometimes you don't even know the impact at the time. It can be something that years later you plant a seed. And therefore, to never underestimate our gift and our power, that we have the ability to help each other. Even though we ourselves may have our own issues, nevertheless, we're able to help. You see, the Talmud says, Ein chavish materes atzmei. A person who's in fetters, who's trapped, cannot free himself. It's a statement. Example being, if you're inside of a pit, a deep pit, you can't get out of the pit unless someone throws you a rope. Psychologically, this is even more so. When you're trapped by your own blind spots, which means you don't know what your blind spots are. Not like the guy who told me, he says, yes, I have blind spots, but I know what they are. Which tells you how blind he is. When you have blind spots, and we all have our subjectivity, and we have our self-interest that blinds us and biases us, and we think we're right, and usually a subjective person cannot really pass judgment whether you're right or wrong. You need someone objective to be able to state that. So that's why you have a friend. Someone that's objective can help you throw you a rope, psychologically speaking, and give you a fresh perspective, an objective perspective. So therefore, even though we're all mortals, but we have the ability to help someone else who at that moment may be in a dark place or blinded and so on. And therefore that gift and responsibility is something we should note, that we can console each other, comfort each other. We're obligated to do so. We go visit someone that's sick. It says you actually take away a part of their 1/70th of their illness. I remember when I was a kid, as a smart aleck, so my father took me once to visit someone in a hospital, and he told me the mitzvah of visiting the sick is because you also not just visiting, it's not just a nice thing you're doing, you actually take away, help them heal. You take away 1/70th of the illness. So my question to him was, as a 5-year-old or 6-year-old, whatever it was, so does that mean if 70 people visit him, the illness will go away? Or if one person visits the person 70 times? So my father said, when you get older, you'll understand. Okay. Anyway, obviously it means not necessarily in physical sense 70. It means that you do alleviate, and as I said before, we can help each other heal. People can give each other strength. And that strength can have a direct impact on your life in a very real, tangible way. Not just psychologically speaking, even physically, psychosomatic, as they call it. So after I finish my words, this woman stands up and asks me to speak to me. So I go outside of the tent, and we speak for a few minutes, more than a few minutes. And she says she wants to apologize because she knows she was behaving very obnoxiously, and she wants to say that it wasn't anyone's fault. And after hearing the words that I said, she wants to know I comfort her. And she tells me the story briefly. She says, today, this Shabbat Nachamu is the first yahrzeit of my son. Passed away exactly 1 year ago on this Shabbat Nachamu. I came to this weekend, I wanted to get away, I'm still in deep pain and loss. And a friend suggested this may be a good thing. And I know it's all about that, and has nothing to do with anyone here. Everybody's been very kind and lovely. And I just wanted to share that with you, because what you said actually did comfort me. And we do have the power to comfort each other. That was what she said. After that, her Shabbos was a little easier. Obviously now, I had sensed due to my own experience in life that there was something going on. Didn't know what. Definitely didn't imagine this to this extent. But I learned a lot, and I never forget the story. Because actually, it came true. Exactly what I had said in the words, actually, it happened right there. Now, I'm no prophet, nor the son of a prophet, as they say. But studying these ideas and taking them to heart and applying them can have an impact. So I share this because it brings us to understand, to dissect some of the, let's call it the anatomy of who we are as human beings, the anatomy of this whole thing called comforting, empathy. we all realize that empathy is a virtue. When you're in a difficult place and someone has empathy to you, it goes a long way. It's very powerful. Someone's sensitive, they take out from their time and from their energy. Instead of being completely self-focused, they make a phone call, or they come visit you, or in some other way show some type of care. We all know the value of that. So why is it that empathy and compassion is such a rare commodity? Why is it so easy for us to appreciate the need for it, and so difficult for us to give it? That's the question. Even though it makes total sense that when you're in a situation of need, you would appreciate if somebody cared. So why is it that you're not always that caring? I know if everyone of us can say I'm always caring and it's always somebody else, fine. If you see it that way, then we basically have 7 billion people who all say they care. So then why do so many of us feel there's no empathy going around? The answer is very simple, but also very tragic and sad. It goes to the core of what we are as human beings. In the most aggressive, I would say, the most raw definition of the Darwinian and Freudian model of the psyche of a human being, we are driven by one most powerful instinct, and that is survival. Survival of the fittest. Everything is all about me, me, me. As soon as your life orbits around you and everybody else is a prop in your life, meaning their role and value is only dependent how much they serve you, then clearly, why would you have empathy? Unless you have something to gain. And this psychological attitude is a disease that affects most of the world today. And it's actually now also been confirmed psychologically. Let's put it this way. If we've evolved from bacteria, like all species, are driven by only one thing. They have no empathy. You ever hear of bacteria having empathy for each other? No. It's all about my survival. Now, we don't see it as criminal when an animal, a predator in the wild, goes hunting and mercilessly rips apart an animal for its own meal. Why? Because that's the rules of nature. That's how the world works. So why can't you apply the same thing to human beings? The strongest shall prevail. Very Nietzschean type of philosophy that the Nazis, in most obscene way, made a real reality in their society. Very kind. They had very, very advanced laws about the sensitivity you have to have to pets, cats and dogs. But as soon as it came to someone they did not like, including Jews and gypsies and handicapped and all the others, it was worse than anything that any animal would ever do to another. Why can't we apply? I'm just thinking. I know it sounds horrendous, but let's just apply the same rule. If we're all just animals in the wild, and human beings are simply a quirk of nature, we've evolved. Okay, we've evolved. We have some intelligence. We've developed some social mores. We have some other factors. But if you go with a very hardcore Darwinian perspective, as Richard Dawkins wrote the book, The Selfish Gene, tells you the title itself tells you the whole thing. The gene is selfish. All it cares about is me, me, me. Even compassion scientists of that ilk will say is also because it's good for me to have a compassionate society, makes me healthier, makes more beneficial. If I need something, I have someone to turn to. So it's like green light, red light. I get something from it, therefore I'm ready to give. But it doesn't have any true so-called objective value. I've even read some, if you read a philosopher like Schopenhauer, you'll find you'll be quite chilling about how heartless that perspective on life is, where really there is no such thing as justice, there's no such thing as compassion or empathy. All this is an illusion, and if it exists, it's only because of selfish gain. So there's definitely that perspective, and it's important to know it because even though you and I may not embrace it, but it's pervasive in academic world today. Not only academic world, this is what prevails in most psychological models. No one likes to say it in such blunt terms because it's not very popular to say the way I just said, that we're just bacteria and bacteria don't have empathy. No one's going to say, hey, listen, I have no empathy because I'm just another survival of the fittest. Doesn't sound very romantic. And also, you're not going to get what you want if you say that. So it also doesn't serve your selfish interest to proclaim that being so transparent. But beneath the surface, you cut to the surface. Is this the true philosophy on Earth today? Is this the approach of Western thinking? The Buddhists like to say that the concept of a self-contained individual is an illusion. And the work in all of Far Eastern disciplines, especially in Buddhism, is to eliminate that illusion. In Judaism, individuality is a reality. We don't see individuality as a curse. And yet, empathy is also a reality. And it's a completely different perspective than the perspective I just offered here. I specifically defined it in such extreme, stark contrast, because you want to really appreciate Torah, you must see it in comparison as a study in contrast to other prevailing systems and models. See, in Judaism, the core principle, the core axiom and assumption is completely different. We're not bacteria. We are created in the divine image, above all. A human being is not like any other creature on earth. And though we have some similarities, and we also have inclinations that are selfish, but fundamentally, to use a certain expression, we could say it's the yid that's the essence of the person, not the id, Freud's id. It's not me, it's the spark of the divine, the pintli yid as it's called, the spark, that is the essence of the driving force inside a human being, the divine image. But also there's an evil inclination, a yetzer hara, that is discussed in chapter 2 in the Torah. So the first chapter in Bereshit, in Genesis, talks about the divine image in which we are created. That divine image then undergoes a concealment due to the eating from the tree of knowledge, where consciousness emerges and self emerges. And then comes in chapter 2, Yetzer Leva Adam Ram and Urav. That's the first source where it says Yetzer Hara. When we say Yetzer Hara, comes from the second verse, second chapter in Noach, after the flood, where it talks that the Yetzer Leva Adam, which means the inclination of the heart of a person, is selfish from childhood or from birth. So there's another inclination. I said selfish, the word is Ra, but Ra means there basically selfish. And therefore we have the battle. This is the core theme of the whole Tanya. The two voices, the battle between two voices. But what is the most inherent and most quintessential human beings? The divine image. It's the core of all Judaism. Everything follows from that. Because take that away, then their responsibility is compromised, obligations are compromised. You could say, hey, look, I'm just like a predator in the wild. I couldn't control myself. Why is that not a good defense? I've asked some people who are hardcore Darwinians or Richard Dawkins fans. I said, why shouldn't it be a legitimate defense in court that we're just evolved bacteria? If I did something really horrendous, I would bring a whole march. I'd bring Richard Dawkins to court. I'd bring all these scientists to testify and say, hey, look, here's proof. We're scientists, academics, proving we're just like bacteria. And I'd say, can bacteria choose or not choose how they should behave? Or they're driven by their selfish genes? Bring proof, solid proof, and that's what happened. What can I do? I couldn't control myself. And I've asked people, they don't really have an answer. Some people, that we really could control ourselves. What do you mean we really could? Could we or can't we? Because we really are not really comfortable with the whole picture. Because even the most hardcore also cannot accept that there's no responsibility at all, or else everything falls apart. Civilization falls apart. But I'm not here to debate the issue. I'm here to make obviously a point. And the point is that everything follows. And above all, empathy. So if we do not have the divine image, animals don't have empathy for each other. Even though it's been documented recently, there's the book that I think it was Oliver Sacks who wrote When Elephants Weep. No, it was not Sacks. It was someone, another author. And they have documentation of animals that actually show empathy to each other. But generally, it's not something, first of all, that's common. It's exceptions. And obviously, yes, of course they feel for each other. But at the same time, that does not limit their ability, and they will never change their natures. Predator will be a predator. When it says that the lion will lay with the lamb, that's a miracle. Even from a Torah point of view. Because a predator is a predator. The human being is expected to have self-control, and one of the biggest chidushim, how do we translate chidushim? Innovations, contributions of Hasidic philosophy in Tanya is in chapter 12. A statement that is not underestimated. People do not value it. But it's direct contrast. 100 years before Freud, the Baal Tanya, the author of the Tanya, Reb Shneur Zalman of Liadi, basically Magdim Refuah Lamaka preceded the cure before the illness. preempted the essentially Freudian concept of the id. The id is that the driving force in a human being is me. Selfish desire, including on the sexual level. And then there's the ego and superego that are required to tame the beast, so to speak. It's not my words. This is hardcore Freudian. Now, not all, I should qualify and say, not all psychologists believe this. Jungian psychology is very different. Definitely logotherapy from Viktor Frankl is different. But it still haunts psychology today, the Freudian model. It's still the prevailing, he's still the God. As many people have debunked him, he still remains, and still he's the one to contend with. So people, he's the guy to disagree with, let's put it this way. Now he's only 100 years old. What does Judaism have to say about all this? Judaism is here several thousand years. Freud himself had Jewish genes. So the Alter Rebbe in Tanya captures it all. He says in chapter 12 the following. He says the concept of moyach shalat al alev literally means the mind over the heart. Self-control, balaz, in our language. Which is not as Lawrence Taylor, the great linebacker of the New York Giants. And I know, people see their sports heroes as being moral paragons, which is itself a joke. But so he was once asked, he used to play while he was injured. How could you play while such injuries? And he would say, it's mind over matter. When you don't mind, it doesn't matter. That was the way he put it. But Lahav and Tanya, Mayach Shalat Lev, he explains as the following. He says, this ability to self-control is not acquired. It is inherent and innate to the human being, Meteva Teldase, from birth. And he then goes on to prove it. This is not a small statement. Because you could argue, a very strong argument, self-control is an acquired skill. The proof, look at newborn children. Do they have any self-control? They cry when they're hungry. You can't speak to them and say, control yourself. Later in the years, they start education, schooling. As you get older, you learn to don't cry. Some will say you don't really stop crying, you just learn that it's not very becoming to cry in public. So people are 30 years old, 40 years old, they have the same tantrums as babies, but they know how to conceal it. But however you interpret it, it seems like an acquired skill, self-control. But there's a big philosophical problem if it's acquired, and psychological problem. If selfishness, and self-interest is inherent, and self-control is acquired, something that is inherent is always more powerful than something that's acquired. Any acquired skill will never be able to match an inherent one. For a while, perhaps, but never for a long period of time is sustainable, because when push comes to shove, the inherent natural inclination will prevail. The classic example they give of it, of the two philosophers arguing about whether you can train animals to be like humans. So here this guy went for years and trained this animal, this cat, to be a waiter in an elegant restaurant. He put it on tails, so this cat would walk around with its nose up in the air. I'm walking on two, carrying these trays in a tuxedo, in a really looking really. And he says, "You see, I've trained this cat to not run around on all four, to look like we behave just as elegant as we can behave." The other philosopher one day decides, let's go to the restaurant. He brings his friend along, and he brings along a little bag. Okay, when the cat comes to deliver the meal, he opens up the bag and outrun, and nobody starts shrieking here. A bunch of mice start running. What do you think happens? The cat drops the tray, gets on all four, and starts chasing the mice. To prove, you can train it for a while, keep it motivated, but it won't last. So the Alter Rebbe makes it clear that the foundation of Torah is based on this, that self-control, it may take time to develop and emerge, but just like a musical talent, a newborn baby also doesn't have, you don't say them playing piano, even at the first day they're born, but no one will claim that the talent came later. They're born with the talent, and it takes the years, it emerges. The same thing with self-control. It's an emerging, not acquired skill, it's an emerging inherent one. And training helps it emerge. This counters the basis of most modern Western psychology. That self-control, meaning that we have a soul, and that soul has natural dominance over our animal desires. And though there's a battle going on, you have the ability. And that's why it's expected of you, and there's obligations and there's expectations. And it's not relative. It's not negotiable. It's the way it is. And it's actually not to make us feel guilty, on the contrary, to make us feel uplifted, to know that yes, you are partially divine. You have a divine element in you. Which brings me now back to the empathy. Why difficult for people to have empathy? Very simple. We're selfish narcissists. Simple as that. And when you start acknowledging that, that's when you begin to start healing. You can mask it. You can hide it. You can look like it's so that you're very humanitarian and benevolent and philanthropic. But the heart, most people are that way. Not necessarily because they're inherently that way, because society, it's like the blind leading the blind. We've been brainwashed. We've been programmed that that's the way to be. That's the way to survive. And then I'll throw into one more thing into this formula, into this equation, and then it becomes really potent. And that is insecurity. So you're coupled with that type of, like watching how everybody else is just taking care of themselves. And seeing it as children. That's what many of our parents do. Many of the adults around us in our impressionable years. And then throw in insecurity, and you got yourself a potent combination of a person who's really not going to be easy to empathize with another, unless they have something from it. Take away those two factors. Take a child and put them in an environment with healthy, secure, confident adults who know what a soul is and don't need to feel they have to acquire and hoard and hold on to, because if not, who knows what's going to happen. And they teach a child, it's not about me, it's about knowing how to give. And knowing that you have confidence to give, because you have nothing, because you do not become less when you give. That child will have natural empathy. So basically we're born into an unhealthy world, into an aberration, a world that is distorted. And that's why empathy is such a rare commodity. And the idea where God says to the prophet, comfort them, not just God himself, is meant to correct that aberration. Because let's not go back to the source of the destruction. Why was the temple destroyed? So there's the first temple, remember the second temple. It says of sinas chinam, baseless hatred. People disliked each other for no particular reason. They were selfish. So God said, how can I rest among you if you can't live with each other and love each other? Like a father, can I come to your party when the brothers and sisters don't get along? I can't be there. What's the point of having a holy temple in Jerusalem, a beautiful building, serving and so on, if you can't get along with each other? God recognized that the human beings became self-absorbed. One of the tragic consequences is baseless hatred, disliking, all about me. The temple was destroyed. How do you repair that? God will come and say, okay, I'm going to console you now? It's not enough. He needs you to console each other. You're the ones that messed it up. I didn't destroy the temple. The temple's destruction was just an inevitable effect, cause and effect. In Judaism, as I've discussed, the Shalah right that reward and punishment is not reward and punishment, it's cause and effect. Just like when you put your hand in fire, you don't say fire is punishing you. Same thing in the world, the cosmic cause and effect, the cosmic immune system has checks and balances. When we behave in certain inappropriate ways, we will self-destroy. It's not a punishment. It's inevitability due to a result of our own actions. Obviously, we can beg and ask God to intervene and try to change the course, just like we can ask God, I put my hand in fire and make sure my hand doesn't get burnt. But there you need some type of divine intervention. The world, it says in the book, second chapter, Mola Aretz Cham, the world was filled with crime. So what happens? A flood. It's not a punishment. They brought themselves. You self-destroyed. So going back to this, so God coming to console the people, He had to have them console each other. You hurt each other, now fix it. Then I'll come. And that's why it began with Nachamu this week. that begins with our ability to empathize with each other, to be sensitive to each other. But let's understand this now deeper. So what's really going on here? So is empathy for another person, or is it for yourself? Based on what I just said, it's a whole different take on why we should be sensitive to each other. The basic thing is it's the right thing to do. If you're blessed in whatever possible way, another person is hurting, the right thing to do is to be there in some way for them, to share a good word in any possible way that you could help them. So that's on a very basic, ostensible level. But on a deeper level, it's much deeper than that. Empathy is a power of your soul that, firstly, if it's not expressed, it's no different than a muscle that's not being used. So in our neshama, in our soul, it says we have 10 faculties. We have the intellectual faculties. What is these noises? Is there like these extraterrestrial sounds? So in our soul, we have the faculties of the cognitive faculties, and we have the emotional ones. There's chesed inside your soul. So just like we eat certain foods to fortify different minerals, vitamins, and so on, to fortify different parts of our bodies. We need calcium, we need vitamin A, vitamin B, different vitamins to strengthen and to fortify and to protect and preserve different parts of the body. The soul also has faculties. Chesed. If you don't use your chesed, if you don't love, you're not just depriving someone else from love, you're depriving yourself of a tool. It's like a person who has a skill and is not using it. What happens when muscles and parts of the body are not used? They atrophy. They start they start breaking down. So that's number one. Empathy is also one of those tools. It's called teferis. Chesed is love, gevura is discipline, and teferis is compassion, or sometimes called rachamim, empathy. That's one thing. The second thing, as I said earlier, empathy is a direct byproduct or direct result of your divine nature, your ability to transcend yourself and your self-interest. So when you don't empathize with someone, you know what's really going on here? Besides the other person not getting what they should be getting, what's happening is you are betraying and violating your own inherent divine nature. So if you want one of the best, I wouldn't say best, one of the sharpest criteria to see what a person is like, look at their measure of empathy, their ability to empathize. So you have people, I once remember a person coming to me with very many difficult problems in their life. I did not envy her in any way. But I saw so much anger and so much bitterness, so much, and basically it's built almost like a cocoon around herself to protect herself from everything, because she's been hurt. And I asked her, I said to you, do you have anyone that you care about? She said, no one ever cared for me, why should I care for anyone? That was the response. And I tried to explain, which didn't work, I should add, at least to that point, that it's not about someone else, but you. When you care for somebody, you're more sensitive to yourself. Well, it didn't work then. It took time. But I saw in front of my own eyes how a person, due to the different challenges in life, became their own worst enemy. I was not going to dismiss, and I'm not dismissing what was done to her. Yes, many things that were not in her control. But after that, it became in her control, and then she made things far, far worse. By closing off and almost like reciprocating, it was actually her undoing. The best thing she could have done was to learn how to care and learn how to love, even though she may not have been cared for or loved. Because that would have exercised that muscle within her, which would become sensitive. Because the bottom line is she was self-loathing. It wasn't that she didn't like others and she liked herself. She couldn't stand herself. The first sensitivity of all is empathize on your soul. So in Hasidic and Kabbalistic thought, there's the talk about have rachmanis on yourself, have compassion on your own soul. How lost it has become. There's that concept. I know it sounds interesting to actually feel bad for yourself, but not feel bad as in self-pity, with just wallowing in your own so-called self-pity and so on. We're talking about feeling bad and doing something about it. Because that's also another cardinal rule. It's also in Tanya. Any feeling of remorse or sadness that leads to demoralization is always coming from a destructive, unhealthy side of you. If it motivates you, it's motivational, it's coming from a healthy point. So the mere fact that you feel sad or you feel remorse is not yet, you don't know whether it's healthy or unhealthy. You want to know if it's healthy? Look at the product, the result. If it motivates you, you know it's coming from a good place. If it's not, it's part of the problem. So the approach is, yes, the first thing is be sensitive to your soul. Your soul is a divine, secure entity. It has immortal powers. It has the ability to comfort others. Even though we're mortals. By exercising that, you become sensitive, first of all, to yourself and to who you really are, what you're capable of. And it teaches you to learn to be secure that you have what to give. The first antidote to all self-loathing, to any type of insecurity, is to figure out that you don't need to be insecure, you have something of value. Most of us, our natural knee-jerk reaction to insecurity is grab something and hold on to something because it'll give me security. It's the exact opposite what you should be doing. What you should be doing is learn to give, and you'll develop confidence and say, hey, I know how to give, I know how to produce. So what we do is the worst thing possible to someone that's insecure is to do something that just feeds insecurity by holding on more and more and more. It would be like someone thinking that if I hoard, that's going to give me security. And it doesn't. Why? Because it's not the solution. The solution is to figure out that you have value without objects. You don't need something to have value. Who taught us that by having a lot of money or possessions or control or influence, that creates value? Whoever taught us that is basically telling you that without that you have no value. Do you have any value if everything is stripped away? Do you have any inherent value if you have no possessions? Answer is absolutely yes. Your birthright. You are part of the divine. You were sent to this earth by God with a reason, with a purpose. Nobody comes on this earth with any material possessions. You come naked into this world. God blesses you and you have a family of wealth. Okay, sometimes it's a blessing, sometimes it's a curse. But let's say it's a blessing. But that's not how you entered into the world. That's not how you're going to leave. You're not taking anything back with you. And yet, you can be absolutely secure because you know what you have, the most important thing of all. God's vote of confidence. He gave you a soul. Is there any portfolio, that man-made portfolio, that can give you more security than that? And if there is, think about what your life is like. But that's what happens. We worship man-made institutions. But don't feel bad. You join the club. Everybody's this way. The question is whether you can break out of it. Rabbi Yechim ben Zakkai on his deathbed, and he was one of the greatest sages, told his students, who were also great sages, thousands of years ago, he told them the following. He says, Halavai, Shetehei meir shamayim aleichem. You should have the fear of God, the heaven of as much as meir basar v'dam, as much as you fear human beings. He was talking to spiritual scholars, people who are very refined and evolved people, and telling them, may God bless you, may you be blessed, halavai, that you should respect God, fear God as much as you fear other human beings, even they, because we relate to the material world. We were put into a world where our souls were concealed, and what is real is the tangible, and therefore we value the tangible and we worship it. And if somebody is watching, it's going to be a deterrent. And if someone tells you God is watching, not necessarily. Because you can't see God, even though He could see you. Because we don't relate to the spirit, we relate to the material. So I say don't feel bad, because that's exactly the way it was planned. It was planned that we would be thrown into a world, thrust into a world, where we have the divine image, but it's concealed. And therefore empathy doesn't come so easily. What comes easily is what we think is secure. I want to be liked. I want to be respected. I want people to value me. And that value is based on very superficial and, above all, impermanent things. Impermanent things. And we call it securities. Impermanent things that don't last. And it becomes a vicious cycle. I'm not suggesting that the wealth of the world, the comforts of the world are not a blessing. But if they become an end, not a means, then it becomes a curse. Then it's a noose around your neck. I know more than one person, but I'm thinking of one particular guy. He grew up, what do they call it? Silver spoon. Money will never be his problem, but everything else is. And he's a very smart guy, but he, as he puts it, to put it bluntly, he says, I am castrated. I live in a gilded cage. I can go anywhere, I can do anything. He wakes up in the morning, doesn't need to do anything. He has enough to live forever, wherever he wants he can do. But he has no life, period. Because he never was challenged. Sense of entitlement, distortions. And if there's a challenge, he just runs right back to his comfort zone, which is that little kid that never earned anything. But because he has that power, can convince himself that he can do anything. And he can do really nothing. And I look at him, and we know each other. I look at him, I cry for this guy. On one hand, everyone would want to be blessed like this. On the other hand, absolutely, I almost see no salvation, even though I'm a royal optimist, and I think like that child, that farm boy that looks into a barn full of manure to the ceiling and says, there must be a pony in here somewhere. You know? Sometimes it's hard to see. I can't see how. The only thing I can see is if you find some God, something greater than the money and all that power. But I don't see it happening, God forbid, unless he's going to have a real break, which he's having, unfortunately, because that life does that to you. Nothing stays forever. The money will stay forever, but your life, you're still a human being. My point is that we live in a world which is a major distortion. All of Judaism is a wake-up call, is to remind us, don't, it's not airtight, this selfish, narcissistic, self-contained world. And it comes Nachamu, it's a reminder that there is another element inside of us. It's interesting, it usually comes after a break, because when everything is going well and there's no cracks, why break it if it ain't broken? Why fix it if it ain't broken, as they say? But it could be completely broken, but it doesn't look broken. If you're riding high and feeling good, you show me the next time you see somebody who's riding high and feeling good, is suddenly motivated to look for something immortal, because things are going good. Why would you go elsewhere? Unfortunately, when there's a crack, when there's a break, as Leonard Cohen sings, the cracks are there to let the light in. That's when you suddenly realize there's something not working. Obviously, we don't have to wait for that, but that's usually when it comes. So in that context, the Nachamu comes after the break, and now things are, the comfort zone has been shaken up. Seriously, now we come to discover, maybe it's time to empathize. But there are a lot of people, when they go through difficulties in life, they become even more bitter, and even more self-absorbed. Because, as I said, if you go in unhealthy, you come out unhealthy. It takes a certain wisdom, it takes a certain inner empathy, as I said, recognizing that sensitive part of your soul to really realize that maybe your perspective has to be changed. So when we come to a week like this, what we're challenged to do is really look at how we empathize with others. The first sign of anything is you see how a person empathizes. Some don't know how to empathize. They don't even see the value in it. They may not say it, as I said, because it's not very popular to say that. Not very PC. But they don't see the value. They say, why should I? We live in a world where dog eats dog. People will take care of themselves. I'm also in that category. Why would I be? Everyone's a shark. But as soon as you make that statement, and that's your attitude, what can I say? I will never argue with somebody who feels that way. If they're so convinced, all you can do is pray for them. There's a story where there was this Rebbe Rashab, the fifth Chabad Rebbe, having a conversation with his only son, the sixth Chabad Rebbe, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchok, known as the Frierdiker Rebbe. And the Rebbe Rashab was saying, look, the Gemara, the Talmud says that you're supposed to have compassion for everybody except for a fool. Shaita, chutz m'shaita. Compassion for everyone except a shaita, an idiot or a fool. Asul l'rachem alav. You're prohibited from having compassion on him. And the Rebbe Rashab said to his son, look how much compassion you have to have to a fool. That even the Torah says he's a person that you shouldn't have compassion to. That was the Rebbe Rashab's statement. You understand what that means? Now, why is the Talmud say not to have compassion? Because a fool is his own worst enemy. Compassion is not going to help you here. This person needs to have his own wake-up call. That's the literal meaning of it. A fool. He's himself. What could you do? Your compassion is not going to help. As a matter of fact, compassion for a fool who's hurting himself can sometimes create more problems. It's like called the crime of compassion. You feel bad for somebody, and he knows you feel bad, and they feed on that as well. And it doesn't help them grow. But nevertheless, the Rebbe Rashab adds, but look how much compassion you have to have, empathy. For a person that the Torah itself says you're not allowed to have empathy. Which means, because there's a deeper dimension. We're not talking about necessarily expressing compassion. Maybe you shouldn't be expressing compassion to a person who's not helping themselves, because it's not really, giving them compassion is not going to help them. It's case by case. But that doesn't mean that you're not sensitive. That doesn't mean you blame them. That doesn't mean that you are oblivious. It means the Torah is telling you, now you have to impose on yourself. You want to really be sensitive to this person, help them help themselves. But that doesn't mean there's no real deeper empathy. The empathy sometimes expressed through overt and direct empathy, and sometimes it's empathy that's expressed through not showing that type of empathy. But it's still that type of empathy. There's still an empathy that's required. So, at the end of the day, empathy is really a description of your sensitivity, not to another, to yourself, to the truth, your openness, your ability to transcend yourself. That's what it comes down to. Empathy to another is just a consequence of that type of sensitivity. If you have that type of ability to transcend yourself and get out of your self-absorbed, self-interest, self-contained narcissism, you are automatically revealed your divine dimension. Inevitably, naturally, without any effort, you will have empathy on others. Now, that doesn't mean until you reach that level, one shouldn't have compassion. Obviously, Judaism also believes in the behavioral approach, which means even if you're not in the mood, you also do it. So there's also just showing compassion, even if you're not yet in that refined, sensitive place. But fundamentally, it's really an expression of that sensitivity, which is why it's pretty easy to see. You look at somebody's life and you see that they don't really have anywhere they really give. They're always taking. You don't see that type of sensitivity to others. It tells you something very profound about that person. Not that they're not kind, or they don't know how to give. It means that there's something about them, within themselves, that is missing. They're probably not very secure. They're probably not in touch with their own inner real strengths. And that's the primary reason they don't know how to empathize. So empathy is really a God-given gift that I said transcends our natural. Bacteria can't do that because bacteria were not created to transcend themselves. In Hasidic thought, there's a question asked. We have the 4 species. It says, Daimim Tzameach Chai Medaber. 4 kingdoms. The mineral world, the vegetable world, the animal world, and the human. So Daimim literally means mineral, or stone. It could be even inanimate. Semeach means anything that grows, any vegetation. Chai means any life, anything that moves. And Medaber, you'd think, would be the description of a human being. You'd think would be seichel, intelligence. What distinguishes a human being from the other 3? The interesting word, Medaber, means the speaker. A human being has the ability to speak. Now, I know we have parrots and parakeets and other creatures and other animals that can be taught to mimic certain words, but speech is not their primary communication tool. Today we also know the sophisticated sounds that whales and other animals emit to communicate with each other, but again, they don't have that ability that we have to have conversation in the full sense of the word. Primarily their sounds are mostly about survival, threats, breeding, and so on. The idea that animals have conversation about abstract ideas doesn't exist. So why dibur? You know why? Because dibur is not just the ability to communicate about our mutual needs. That's animals do that too. Dibur is the ability for us to understand each other, to empathize. You have an opinion, and I have an opinion, and we could sit down and talk, and I could learn something that you have not yet learned, and you can teach me something, I can teach you something. that does not exist any species outside of humans. Yes, animal kingdom, animals train their young in hunting, and they learn from their parents certain skills. But number one, those skills are going to come to them almost naturally. They have them, and their parents just induce it. But it's definitely not in the discussion. Mediation doesn't exist in the animal kingdom because they don't have arguments like we have either. So, the idea of being able to communicate, dibur, is not just dibur that you could speak to each other. We can speak to each other or negotiate business matters. That's that. You have that all the time. You have that in animal kingdom too. They also negotiate, so to speak. You have the battles that the leaders of the herds fight with each other. Who's the control of the turf? You have the different battles, but the ability to reason, the ability to come to understand something you haven't understood before, the ability to transcend yourself. Dibur, medaber, captures the transcendent element of a human being. So intelligence is a part of it, but real transcendence is the ability to dialogue, to communicate. Look, Moses goes up on the mountain, and he speaks to God, and God says, I will not forgive them. They did the cardinal betrayal, the cardinal sin of building the golden calf. Total betrayal. And Moses speaks to God, and God speaks to Moses. And Moses changes God's mind, kavyachol, so to speak. So the ability for us to be able to transcend ourselves and our inclinations is similar to the ability to empathize, which means you get out of your own self-contained reality and you see another person. I feel your pain. So naturally, we're talking about, I mean biologically naturally by the rules of the universe, by the rules of this selfish physical universe, a world of matter. What you have, you own. Everything is defined by space and time and your control of it. So by those rules, why would you care? Why would you feel someone else's pain? But by a higher rule, which is that you have a divine dimension that transcends time and space, then you are able to get out of your own and actually feel somebody else. Which also means you can transcend your own limitations and feel yourself. So when people ask the question, how do I get out of a trap? I'm dating and it's going nowhere. People, for years, they can't find their soulmate. It's one example. Everybody has their so-called share, their peckle, their baggage. They keep doing the same thing, and they keep doing different things, and it's not producing the intended results. So when people come, the first question you ask them is, well, let's go through the usual suspects and see if there's something you haven't done. And of course some will say, well, I did everything. What else can I do? Some come to the conclusion there must be a curse on me. Because I did everything I can do. So it must be a curse. It must be something supernatural. What do you say to someone like that? You obviously ask them, maybe you have some blind spots. Now, that has to be said with sensitivity. But let's just, for argument's sake, we could have dibur, conversation. You can say, okay, maybe I have blind spots. That means that maybe you haven't left. Maybe you have left some stones unturned. Very hard for a person who's made a lot of effort to come to that conclusion, because they feel that they have. And usually, the things that are most uncomfortable to people are the things that they don't do. It's like that joke about these two guys go to a leg doctor, foot doctor. They both had terrible pain, same place, some sciatica or something like that. Anyway, one goes into the doctor, and the doctor obviously is examining him, and from the room, in the waiting room, you could hear the guy starts yelling, and he says, wow, that guy must be in terrible pain, because the doctor is clearly touching, examining, and it's very sensitive nerves. Okay, he finally comes out. The doctor gave him his prescriptions, whatever. And this guy, with so much yelling and screaming, he decided he wants to hear what this guy's going to go through, the second guy. So the second guy goes in, he has the same exact problem, and he's in there by the doctor, and it's quiet, no sound. So what is he? He's got the courage, he's able to self-control, not be able to this. And he finally, so he can't wait to ask him what happened. He comes out, he says, what happened? You had the same problem as I couldn't stop yelling, it was so painful. How did you manage it? He says, I showed him the other foot. Meaning, he didn't show the doctor his real foot, the real problem. So the doctor was examining the wrong foot. So obviously there was no pain involved. Or the classic Chelem joke. The guy's looking for his keys in the dark, He lost his keys. It's a dark night, and a fellow comes over and says, "Let me help you look." He says, "Where'd you lose them?" So he points 100 yards away. So he says, "So why are you looking here?" He says, "Because here's where the light is shining." So there's a Chelim story. It's a classic story about healing, that people never point to the place where they go where the light is shining. Nobody wants to go to the places that are uncomfortable. So just like when the doctor starts examining, you start getting closer to where it hurts, you start yelling. Psychologically too. Usually the place that you know is a problem is where people say, "No, there's no issue, let's not even go, there's nothing to talk about there." The more they resist, the more, rest assured, there's a problem there. So we are blind to our own problems, and therefore we're not sensitive to ourselves. So we don't know how to transcend our own comfort zone, basically, and we end up stuck. You may be more comfortable, but you're also not going to heal this way. It will be like someone who just will not acknowledge that there's a problem. Or they acknowledge there's a problem, but they will never acknowledge that the problem may be in this area, which is exactly where the problem is. So the first step is transcending yourself. That's why sometimes marachim ala brius, having compassion, empathy to others, transcending yourself to help others, ends up helping you in return. So it can go both ways. Either you can transcend yourself and help yourself, and then automatically you are sensitive, empathetic to others, or the other way around. That's why there's an expression, Kol mispal ba'at chavere hu nena tchila. Anyone who prays for another in a time of need will be answered first. Which means, obviously, in the same area of a problem. If you have an issue, and instead of thinking about yourself, you pray for someone else who has a similar issue, you will be answered first in your. Why is that the case? Was it some type of a zgula, some trick? That God says, you think about someone, I'll think about you. Okay, you could explain it that way, but it's deeper than that. Because it's the ability to transcend. You can transcend yourself and think about someone else. It'll help you transcend yourself and be thought about and heal in your area that may be blocked. That's why we say, L'cha Hashem Tzedakah, we give charity, because then God in turn gives us charity. So you may be doing it maybe for ulterior motive, but the point is, you're able to get out of your own self and able to help another. You in turn are helped. Not just as a reward, because it's opened you up to getting beyond the things that trap you. So how does a person get beyond themselves? Empathy is the greatest tool possible for a person to transcend their own boundaries, their own self-confined, self-contained self. So we're put into this world as this self-contained individual. Trapped inside is a soul that's divine and naturally has natural empathy. And our challenge is, can you be wise enough to not be deceived by what you see and by what the world worships, and understand that the real purpose of it all is for you to become not a taker but a giver. And when you learn to do that, then you learn that your soul has what to give. And the more you give, the more confident you become, because you see you have that capability. You actually have what to give. You have value. You have enough value. You have inherent value that you can share with another. So in this context, empathy takes on a whole different takes on a whole different meaning. It's reflective of the transcendent self as opposed to the selfish self. And it is like two people, like Adam 1 and Adam 2, so to speak. Two humans, two possibilities that we all face any time. So then we come in the cycle of the year, where after 3 weeks of destruction, which can be translated into any loss, any betrayal, anything that we have suffered in our lives. We've all suffered, different ways. Then comes 7 weeks of compassion. And the 7 actually correspond to the 7 emotions. Chesed, Gvura, Tiferes, Netzach, Chayid, Yesod, Malchus. With each week focusing on another one of the emotions. But overall, they're all captured by the word called empathy. They're all captured by the word called transcendence. The ability to feel another human being, not only yourself. Now, the real power here is intelligence. That an intelligence is transcendent is no big thing. The mind, by nature, is a transcendent element. You can understand things that are not about yourself. You can understand another person's situation. Through the mind, you can travel to places that you have never been to. Because the mind by nature is a transcendent force. It's an explorer. It opens you up to new vistas, new horizons. That's the definition of intelligence, of knowledge. You learn new things. You learn about other things in life. But it's far different to have emotional transcendence. That's intellectual transcendence. Emotional transcendence means that you actually feel for another. You can understand everything in this world and not feel for anybody. Because it's all in the mind. So emotional transcendence, or we can call it emotional maturity, is really the challenge of the Shabbat Nachamu, the 7 weeks of compassion. How that emotionally we can feel. And that is a far greater maturity. There are many people who've grown chronologically are adults. They may even be intellectually adults. It's a smaller number. But emotional adults are far, far less. Because emotional adult means a person who has that emotional intelligence, emotional maturity, to be able to be secure, and is not just a child in an adult body, not just a child that has that's in an adult mind. It's a person who's grown emotionally, and that is a far different type of maturity that takes a lot more work. That doesn't come naturally. Any human being going through the natural process is going when you're 1 year old, 2 years old, 3 years old. It's been mapped out scientifically, the psychological development of a human being. But emotional intelligence is something that has to come through work. It doesn't come automatically. You grow, your mind grows, your body grows. All this leads you to maybe greater places. But emotional intelligence, emotional maturity comes with an individual who works on themselves. This requires you making an effort to empathize, sensitivity, other forces and other elements that help you get beyond yourself. And that doesn't just come naturally. Many people become more selfish as they get older, and they use their minds to figure out new ways to protect themselves, to take care of themselves. They become innovative in their narcissism. Emotional intelligence is the ability for a person to truly learn to go beyond themselves. Love is an example. True love is not selfish love. True love is transcendent love. Is the ability to go beyond yourself and to love something outside of you. Not that other person is an extension of you, so you just have another extension. So you love an extension of yourself or what it does for you. But it's actually the ability to transcend. So real transcendence is the ability to get out of the material boundaries and parameters that define existence. That this is this, I'm here, and that's it. Everything else is outside of me. Transcendence is the ability to realize, no, it's all part of me. We're all part of one larger organism. If another person is hurting, I'm hurting. And vice versa. It's the ability to see the bigger picture, see that we're all indispensable musical notes in a larger composition, and that other notes are part of who you are. And getting out of getting out of the attitude and the mindset that it's an ethos, that everything is about me, me, me. Now, I know many of these ideas I shared here perhaps are not relevant to everyone here because we're all very transcendent, selfless, giving people. But just in case you do meet someone that fits some of the criteria that I did describe, you have a few words that you can share with them. Like that guy that came to the Rebbe Marash and said, I have a friend who did a really terrible thing. He's ashamed to come to speak to you. So he sent me to ask you for help. So the Rebbe looked at him and said, why did he have to expose himself to you? He could have just come to me and say, I have a friend. So very often we ask advice about a friend. It's really we're asking about ourselves. Sometimes it's hard to say it's me. Kol mispal ba'at chavere. Could also mean I pray for another person. I'm really praying for myself. I'm just saying it's my friend. And really it's about helping ourselves. So we all have our challenges. And what can I say? A happy life, a joyous life is the person who learns to give. A joyous life is the person who has the security and knows that he has bottomless amount to give. That you have a perpetual wellspring. That you have, no matter how much you give, there's more. Imagine having that feeling all the time. What it would do to you? The buoyancy, the lightness of spirit that it would add. And the opposite is also true. When you weigh yourself down with hoarding, with saying, I need this, I need this, I need this for security, you end up becoming weighed down by it all, and it becomes very heavy spirit. So another an element of empathy is it lightens you. It's like knowing how to give, knowing how to share. And I'll conclude with another thought from the Rebbe Marash, which is connected to this, that is really the essence of all real camaraderie. So the Mishnah says, "Aseh lecha rav v'knei lecha chaver." Appoint for yourself a mentor and acquire for yourself a friend. A mentor or a teacher or a rav is more of an authority. You need someone to give you a definitive. A friend is someone that offers also empathy, discusses the situation, is more like an advisor. We need both in life. We need people who are like authority, because sometimes you need a verdict. What should I do? Here, there, there. But we also need the ability to be empowered and feel that we can work it through, and a friend can help objectivity, discussing it. So the story is, so it says like this in the Talmud, in the verse it says, Im yidag adam yasiach. If a person has anxiety, yidag, doyag, daiga, concerns, yasiach, that's a solution. The Talmud asks, what does the word yasiach mean? If you have anxiety, what means yasiach? There's two meanings in the Talmud. One says yasiach comes from the word with a samach. Yasiach hesach hadas. Distract yourself. If you have anxiety, distract yourself. Do something else, and it will alleviate. It will somewhat weaken the anxiety. And the second interpretation is yasiach is with a sin, not with a samach, from the word sicha. Speak about it. Dibur, speak to someone. And that'll help alleviate it. So the Rebbe Marash asks a question. There's a contradiction of these two. These aren't just two mutually complementary, compatible interpretations. They contradict each other. Because distracting yourself is the exact opposite of speaking about it. Distracting means you don't focus on it and go somewhere else. Speaking about it means you're focusing on it and talking about it. So how do you reconcile this? And his answer is brilliant. His answer is that when you speak about it, you release it from yourself, and it allows you to distract yourself from it. Speaking here, in other words, not dwelling and obsessing. Speaking means breaking the silence, opening yourself up and just helping the relief that you're able to not carry it inside of you. Which in essence is a form of empathy. When you go to speak to someone and they allow you to speak to them and you speak it through, it's also that transcendent element that gets you out of yourself, and that therefore automatically allows you to free yourself from it, and it shouldn't become such a heavy weight. It's almost a relief. When people say they break the silence, I was able to finally share it with someone. So in these weeks that we begin now, the 7 weeks of compassion, of comfort, of empathy, which will lead right into the weeks of Elul, which is the month of compassion and empathy. It's called the Chedesh HaRachamim, the month of Rachamim. Rachamim is empathy, compassion. It's the month when God reveals to Moses on the mountain, when he says to God, show me something about yourself that you have not shown anyone ever. In deep love, Moses is saying to God, show me your face, show me what you are capable of. Trying to elicit compassion. So God says, I'll show you. And he reveals to him the Yud Gimel Midas HaRachamim. These are called the 13 attributes of mercy, of compassion, of the divine. 13 secrets that only God has, and we actually repeat them on Yom Kippur many, many times. Yom Kippur is like the ultimate day of that compassion and empathy, when God showed empathy and we show empathy to each other. So there's a secret about it. So as we enter this period in time, it's a great way to enter is to open your heart in this way, begin to be sensitive to yourself in new ways, and also sensitive to others in new ways. Is the single most healing agent possible, more than anything else that you can do, because it transcends anything that you're in. Whatever situation you're in, it helps transcend from it. It helps you free yourself somewhat. And that freedom opens up new opportunities, always. Every other solution is going to be on your terms, in your trapped place. That's not as easy. This frees the shackles. This somewhat loosens the ties, loosens the bonds that keep us so often trapped. So may God bless everyone to experience this empathy on all levels, starting from this Shabbat Nachamu. Think about some of these words and implement it. Find somebody tomorrow, tonight, say something kind. Find a way to express sensitivity in an email, in a text, phone call, in person. Think about it. And you'll see it'll open up new channels. It's a way of thinking. Stop thinking so much about yourself. Maybe it's time to think. Give a minute to another person. And with that merit, God will give you an extra minute as well. Or maybe more than that. And that spirit, as we are beginning Shabbat Nachamu, and which leads us into the month of Elul in a few weeks. So, my dear friend, Volvo and colleague, just passed on to me the 60 Days book, which we have available, and I actually built it around this concept of redemption, betrayal, reconciliation, compassion, empathy. It's available here if you'd like to have it. In a few weeks we'll also begin a daily email that we'll send out. So if you want to sign up for that, which is a free subscription, I'll be happy to send it to you. So if you don't have your email address, please leave that with us. And Philip will be giving his class tomorrow evening. So anybody interested, please contact us. We will resume this weekly journey next Wednesday. And until then, everyone should have a very pleasant, empathetic, sensitive week from above and from below. And it's always an honor and pleasure to share a few words with you. Thank you so much.